In 1979, Don Coscarelli, working with amateurs and funded locally in an entirely do-it-yourself piecemeal fashion, serving as director, editor, and cameraman, filming on weekends, somehow created the mind-bending dreamlike classic Phantasm, introducing the world to the dark and malevolent entity known as the Tall Man and his uniquely crafted and mysterious mythology. On an estimated budget of $300,000, the film went on to gross over $11 million at the box office. Because of such numbers and likely due to the success of The Beastmaster, in 1988 Universal Studios took an interest and gave Coscarelli the largest budget any Phantasm movie would ever receive, $3 million. The studio controlled much of the creative decision-making and direction of the film, not allowing any disambiguity, as well as forcing Coscarelli to choose replacing either Reggie Bannister or Michael Baldwin with a professional working actor. Because of these changes, we will never know or see what Coscarelli truly envisioned, but what we are presented with is the camp classic genre masterpiece Phantasm 2. In 1994, 6 years later, and on an estimated budget of $2.5 million, Coscarelli unveiled Phantasm 3. It had a 2-week limited theatrical run, then went straight to video, marking the straight-to-video turning point for the Phantasm series. Apparently due to some politics or whatever between Universal and Coscarelli, described as bad blood by Reggie Bannister in an article. The film was not given a theatrical release by Universal, even though MCA Home Video wanted one, and even after test runs showed extremely positive figures. The film delves much more into the campy comedic realm of horror, and like the film preceding it, starts with a montage, then picks up exactly where the last film left us. The Tall Man is alive, or a Tall Man is alive, as we are shown how and what happens when one is eliminated. And it is visually nearly perfect, as a new Tall Man emerges unharmed and unmoved and simply throws the smoldering body of the old Tall Man into the dimensional fork. Mike and Reggie are attacked in their escape hearse and crash. Mike is thrown from the hearse and knocked out. After some action, Reggie stalemates the Tall Man with a grenade.
I don't want him in pieces. It's the only way you're gonna get him.
Mike awakens after years in a coma, in a beautifully scened near-death experience. The Tall Man locks on to a strange reintroduction of Jody, Mike's dead brother, takes Mike, and Reggie takes to the road to save him. Along the way, he meets a Rambo-esque little kid named Tim that serves as an action protagonist and a sidekick to Reggie, and a buff kung fu chick named Rocky that serves as the same, as well as hopeless chick bait for the ever-present attempts of Reggie. Together they battle the Tall Man's minions, which have been expanded to include a gang of 3 lich-like miscreant zombies who serve as great antagonists. The classic dwarves, an army of spheres which include a giant gold sphere, while the Tall Man himself rounds off the assault, having better lines, more screen time, and a better delivery than the previous entry. They managed to save Mike, sort of, develop the plot, sort of, and give us another epic, comedically hilarious entry that is an exceptional and fairly unique entry into the franchise, and remains to this day a masterpiece within the genre. This film contained some poorly executed, way too over-the-top moments for me, that were meant as comedy but perhaps went too far into the silliness realm. Nevertheless, it still holds very strong to this day as a great over-the-top action horror comedy. Before we get into the top 13, please hit that like and subscribe, as it is truly the only way I can grow my channel. And without any further ado, here is the top 13 reasons, scenes, characters, arcs, whatevers, that make Phantasm 3 a camp genre horror sci-fi masterpiece. At 13, we have the new and improved hand monsters. The hand monsters are bigger and better than the original, and arguably funnier. When the Tall Man attempts to cross through a dimensional portal, Reggie stops him just in time to remove his hands. They quickly turn into hand monsters, reminiscent of the first film. Of course, Reggie gets the claw on the nose, as he always serves as the comedic fodder, and it's a funny and well-filmed action scene. At number 12, we have the Zombie Lich Gangsters. A group of scavenger gangster-likes take Reggie hostage and lock him in his trunk. They then try to scavenge Tim's house, where Tim quickly disposes of them and saves Reggie. Later, their bodies are stolen by minions of the Tall Man, where he seemingly revives them into extremely durable zombie lich creatures. They serve as great antagonists, as their mobility and durability allow them to stalk and fight with our heroes much more effectively than the dwarves. And their ability to absorb large amounts of damage makes them extremely deadly and accomplished minions. Since they are human actors and capable of dialogue, this also opens up the game for wisecracks and shenanigans, all of which are done with Coscarelli's growing skill for creating comedy alongside brutal camp gore. Aside from the spheres, they are easily the most deadly of the Tall Man's creations to date, and serve their purposes amazingly. The damage they take from our heroes, as well as their deaths, are done amazingly. When Jody destroys the taller male, it is a camp work of genius. At 11, we have Mike. Michael Baldwin returns as Mike Pearson, and he does a really good job in the role. I remember at the time fans throwing a tantrum of happiness over the situation on the Phantasm websites and forums. And at the time of release, I was a huge fan. I had waited 3 to 4 years for this movie, having discovered Phantasm 2 in edited form on Fox sometime in the early 90s. I then exposed myself to the original shortly thereafter. In my opinion, it was kind of strange changing Mike at this point. It's as if Star Wars returned Jake Lloyd to reprise his role as Anakin, after Hayden Christensen portrayed the character in Attack of the Clones. It feels much more out of place than replacing a child actor with a different adult. And obviously we have Universal to blame for this problem existing in the first place, forcing Coscarelli's hand in making him drop Michael Baldwin from Part 2. But it happened, and I know I will alienate many true fans. But I would have loved to see what James LeGros could do as Mike in the later films. LeGros' career is actually quite varied, and he has played a wide array of roles, many times alongside heavy Hollywood hitters like Matt Damon and Drew Barrymore. And he has, in my opinion, always done a very good job in these roles. Another side of me enjoys having the original Michael Baldwin back. He does have a unique appearance and voice that helps to define Mike. And after having 4 films with Michael Baldwin portraying Mike, it does feel strange to watch Part 2 and have a different actor playing him. Still, I would like to have seen what LeGros could have done, and it would have been much more consistent. What we have, however, is the return of the original Mike. He does pull off the role and give us a great performance. Although he does deliver some lines poorly, this is the exception, not the rule. And he does seem to gain more and more chops as he ages, in my opinion doing better with each installment. Mike as a character at this point is somewhat broken down by his situation. No matter what he does, even die, the tall man is waiting for him at every turn. There is seemingly no escape, and in this film he spends nearly half of it entrapped by the tall man, whose intentions no longer appear to be the death of Mike, but some strange transformation. The development of the tall man's need for Mike is much more explored, and, as always, it asks more questions than it answers. Overall, Mike is still a strong protagonist and hero, and he still fights to the end no matter what his situations are. But here he is presented with many new problems, all of them seemingly hopeless. Even when the tall man is eliminated, Mike's situation is darkened immensely. He has a gold ball in his head, he is bleeding yellow tall man-like blood, and his eyes have gone gold as he flees to the wastelands with Jody, having no real idea what is happening to him. At 10, we have the plot scene.
Jody, teach me about him. I need to know why.
The scene in which Jody enters Mike's mind and shows him the tall man at work while explaining his intentions is done very well. I find Jody's dialogue here to be somewhat out of character and slightly weird. The Jody I know would say he destroys their mind until they act only on instinct, etc., not
Left with only a vestigial part of the cerebral cortex.
But it is a powerful line, and the grandiose lines Jody performs here are performed to near perfection.
His kind are amassing an army to conquer dimensions, worlds unknown.
Mike freezes up, or refuses to flee with Jody as the tall man seemingly locks onto them, finds the group, and initiates his final assault upon them. A well-filmed scene, full of dark and visceral images, as well as a breath of fresh air in an attempt to finally reveal some of the grand mystery behind the series, whilst providing us with a grand narrative and visuals. A darkly sinister and new plot point is revealed. His kind are amassing an army. The dwarf creatures are the byproduct.
The dwarf creatures are the byproduct of the process.
Thus we learn that the dwarves are not the true army, but simply a byproduct of an immense army of spheres. A much more deadly and capable weapon, especially in large numbers. His kind are amassing an army. Flat out says the tall man exists as multiple entities. As a race of being or what, we have no idea. But we have seen that more than one exist, and now they have been referred to as a kind, a species. Most of what we learn of the plot, we learn from this scene. And as mentioned before, it is a great breath of fresh air to get a scene that just flat out explains things. Bringing us to number 9, the plot. The plot is great. The plot of these films are always one of their strongest points. But as the films develop and continue, the plot can only be developed and reveal so much without destroying the mystery and grandeur hiding beneath the surface of every development. The plot very much resembles Part 2. Hit the road and get the tall man. The difference? They need to save Mike in the process. And much more of the tall man's intentions and mysteries are revealed. As always, the malevolent mortician is ravaging the countryside, whilst resurrecting the dead and adding an ever-growing number of dwarves and now spheres to his great army. The true threat, as the dwarves are revealed to be a byproduct of sphere production. It is explained that he is building this army to conquer dimensions. Thus, the tall man's goal is not world domination, but dimensional domination. The world would simply be one stop along the way. This also seems to reveal the red planet is not Mars, or even to be thought of as a planet, but that it most likely exists as an altogether different dimension. The development of the tall man's powers, army, and effects on the countryside is done quite well. Every town is empty and devoid of life. These are small towns, and it seems the tall man is yet to begin an assault on cities. In the original, he was working hard on one specific town, and no one knew of him. In the second, his effect was much more widely seen, as many towns had been completely harvested. And here it is yet again shown to be affecting more and more of the countryside, with this gas station advertising ammunition and guns rather than gas. The tall man seems to be at the height of his small-town American binge at this point, and his powers are at an all-time high as well. He can manipulate objects telepathically, resurrect the dead into an almost lich-like zombie with the ability to absorb huge amounts of damage and still function perfectly. And the grand secret of the spheres is revealed. Thus his army is supplanted with seemingly thousands or even millions of these shiny sentinels. His power is ever growing, and he is, as always, truly a force to be reckoned with. While the plot develops this well, it does not explain a great many mysteries, while creating more than it answered. Fundamentally, it doesn't add all that much to the plot of Phantasm 2, which didn't add all that much to the plot of Phantasm 1. It is still one of the greatest plots in horror movie existence, and arguably evolves the plot more so than any other sequel in the franchise. And it is all you need for healthy horror development. You do not need more than the plot of Phantasm 1, which is beyond golden. You can truly just take that plot on the road in an action movie formula over and over and over, while slowly revealing slightly more with each new film. It is a great formula, and it is yet to fail. At number 8, we have the ending. The situation we are left with is truly grim, as Mike has been altered, and his transformation is both mysterious and horrifying. Or has he simply been revealed to be what he was to begin with? He flees to the wastelands, followed by Jody. Rocky leaves, which is a weird way to have a character exit. And in my opinion, if Rocky was not meant to stay, she should have never shown up in the first place, or been killed off. And I find this to be a weakness in the film. Reggie returns to the mausoleum and is met with tons of spheres, a new tall man, and a great jump scare ending that draws its influence directly from the original, just as the ending of 2 did. It is done quite well, and the creature that grabs Tim is as usual, simple yet horrifically designed. At 7, we have the beginning. The beginning is truly epic. As Reggie narrates, shots of the tall men are interspersed with montage footage from the previous films, whilst the signature Phantasm theme plays. It is up to this point the best beginning of any Phantasm film. Whilst 2 suffered from the silliness of Liz's character, we have dropped that for the narration of the fan-loved Reggie. It is an epic and grand beginning to a great film. The new footage begins as the last movie ends. Continuing Phantasm's epic beginning-ending dynamic started with 2. After succeeding over impossible odds and eliminating the tall man, Reggie and Mike race away in a hearse. Alchemy, Reggie's love interest, is revealed to be a minion of the tall man, and as the hearse races away. In part 2, Mike and Liz are grabbed from behind in an ending owing homage directly to the first. The hearse stops and Reggie drops to the ground, seemingly dead. In part 3, the hearse crashes and it appears Mike has been thrown from the wreckage and knocked out. Reggie races to it, battles dwarves and trees, and forces an epic stalemate with the tall man. Of note, Liz has been written out, and as it should be, her head is taken by the tall man. Unlike Rocky and Tim, she doesn't just leave. Her death serves to further drive the plot in the "why would he need her head" idea. At 6, we have the imagery, special effects, and action. The imagery is done very well. It is not as creepy as the original movie, except perhaps in the ending. But the grandiose set designs and explorations into the tall man's universe, as well as imagery of thousands of spheres dancing about, is done amazing. Mike looks creepy, confused, and terrified. While I find the CGI morphing effects into and out of ball form by Jody to be silly, they look good, especially for 1994. The zombies are perhaps some of the best antagonists to date, and as the team interacts with them, especially in the car battle, when the female zombie is run over, it looks amazing. The amount of damage they can take makes them perfect fodder for the ridiculous over-the-top weapons and battles of the Phantasm world. The tall man and his minions as always look spot on, and the plot development scene in which the tall man works on the dwarf is amazing looking. All around, the visuals of the tall man himself are actually in many ways arguably superior to the previous films, even the first. The mortuary where this was filmed was humongous and amazing, and serves as a great set for the final battle. The action is amazing. With the knowledge and experience gained in his previous entries, Coscarelli's action scenes have only gotten better and better with time. They are not perfect, of course, and it is rare to get a director that can perfectly pull off action, but they are very well done, and they are an amazing feature to the movie. pushing it further and further into the realm of camp action over-the-top violence, which as of Part 2 becomes a mainstay within the series. Some highlights would include a 3-dwarf one-shot kill, as always many explosions, the spheres and their constant shenanigans, and the zombies. The zombies were perhaps included so they could have more elaborate drawn-out fight scenes, as the dwarves are not exactly mobile and the sphere scenes can only extend so far. Reggie and company all provide great battle scenes and commentary as they continually wade through the ranks of the Tall Man's armies. The action is so great that the next 2 entries in this list revolve around it. At 5 we have the car battle. The car battle is the best car battle in all of Phantasm, and there have been quite a few car battles. This one seems to simply up the ante on all of them, to the point of being an obvious remake of the car battle from Phantasm 1 and 2. But it is amazing. When the female zombie takes a quad-barreled shot to the face and is then run over, it may well be the best scene in the movie.
Shoot that bitch!
Some of the action, of course, is not perfect. I'd like to see reactions from some of these shots, not just air. But the shot, bump, and epic hearse launch to explosion that follows them more than make up for it. At 4, we have the end battle. The end battle is amazing. It is one of the all-time great Phantasm battles, involving the zombies, the Tall Man, and a huge golden sphere that breaks loose from the Tall Man's head. It is a great battle that is kicked off by a zombie blowjob, in a hilarious scene that pretty much sums up the camp nature of the movie. From here, the heroes battle non-stop until they manage to triumph over all comers, even seemingly killing the Tall Man. At 3, we have the spheres. The spheres are great, as always. Their mythology, as already discussed, is greatly expanded upon, as well as their number, as they now exist in the thousands, if not the millions. It has been revealed the dwarves are the byproduct of creating an army, and this army is finally revealed, quite literally dwarving the last threat. They also exist in the heads of various Tall Man minions, as well as the Tall Man himself having a golden ball in his head. As always, they keep trying to up the ante and make the spheres bigger and better, and they achieve this quite well, giving us one of the all-time great sphere battles, if not the best sphere battle of the entire franchise, as well as revealing a ton of mythos surrounding the existence, creation, and utilization of the spheres and the plot, as the creation of the spheres rather than the dwarves now fuels the epic apocalyptic nature of the plot. At number 2, we have Reggie Bannister. Due to Mike being abducted by the Tall Man and missing for much of the film, for the first time Reggie takes his place as the lead actor. This will continue for the rest of the franchise, with Reggie leading the next 2 films as well. It is actually a very good decision. Reggie has been a consistent fan favorite, and arguably much more well received than Mike himself, and he does an amazing job leading the films, and fans had no problem handing the helm of lead role over to him. In 2, he was practically a lead role with Legros already, so it was not a huge change to begin with. As Reggie traverses the desolate landscapes, he is involved in a variety of shenanigans and battles, all the while really fleshing out the character and showing that he understands how to play what I imagine is an over-the-top version of himself. Reggie Bannister served in Vietnam. He knows how to handle a weapon, even doing many of his own stunts. I believe this shows in his acting and believability as a heroic lead. As in Part 2, and arguably much more so, he envisions and embodies that lonely wandering soldier. He leads the films as a bumbling and scared Rambo-esque hero, always hitting on women and being turned down, which is actually funny and works well with the Rocky character, as she is a character who he interacts with often. In the cases of the random women he meets on the road that always turn out to be some tall man trick, I find it to get old and unneeded. Of course, Reggie is armed with his 4-barrel shotgun, a weapon he crafted in Part 2, and with it he has many great moments. 3 dwarves from the trees with one well-placed shot come to mind.
God damn it.
What we have is Reggie Bannister, perhaps at his very best, mowing down dwarves and spheres, while getting goo splattered in his mouth, an insect tall man finger shoved way up his nose, a zombie blowjob, and serving as the comedic fodder as well as the main heroic direction for most of the movie.
It smells like something's burning.
It's just me, baby.
He is obviously scared, but not stupid. Reggie is like a wolf, constantly circling in on his opponents, looking for an opening. And when they rush him, he flees to achieve a better vantage. This, of course, is played with a comedic timidity and authenticity that defines the character throughout the films. This is the Reggie fans have grown to love.
Hey, loosen up a little. Ever try vanilla?
And this is the Reggie that exemplifies what the series became. A campy, action-influenced, uniquely original horror sci-fi epic. And all campy horror flicks need a lead hero to fill this epic, now cliched role. Phantasm had Reggie, portrayed by Reggie Bannister, and he more than fulfilled his roles in this task, making Reggie one of the most beloved, if not the most beloved character in the franchise.
If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs.
Before we get to number 1, we have many honorable mentions. The creepy nurse is great, over the top, kind of cheesy, and very fun. Her brain opens up to reveal she has a sphere inside her head, and Reggie gets a mouthful of goo. It is a great scene. Another honorable mention would be the tall man's new weakness. It is interesting and adds a nice element to the plot. Cold hurts him. The idea that the tall man has a weakness is a new addition, and the shot from the first film that exemplifies it is done very well. They use the weakness well and momentarily kill him with it. Twice. Jody is back, is dead, is a sphere, is interesting, is cheesy. Still, it is a nice development of the plot and a nice reintroduction of Jody, and it is arguably needed as Jody provides an in-between for our protagonists, an insider in the world of the tall man. Thus, Jody is able to develop the plot more so than any other character when he reveals the tall man's plans to Mike. The dwarves are back. They don't look better or have a much larger role, and have been semi-replaced by the more threatening and mobile gangster lich zombie things. And their role in driving the plot and the threat of the tall man's army has been removed, as they are revealed to simply be a byproduct of sphere production, and not in any way the real army of the tall man, just a million-strong backup regiment hanging out in the Red Planet. When you think about the population of Earth and how many dead people are on Earth, it actually makes sense these armies of dwarves and spheres will eventually reach numbers in the billions or even in the trillions when including the population of other dimensions as well. A truly threatening thought. I'm assuming such numbers are needed to successfully conquer dimensions and establish a true reign of terror as the tall man. Tim's introduction is campy, funny, and sometimes too over the top for me. It's also great at times. He kills all of the soon-to-be lich zombie gangsters quite easily, and it does define him as an overpowered little bastard. Tim does a good enough job with his lines, and the character is an interesting take on a little Rambo kid. He even has a great backstory. He doesn't make it to part 4, while making it clean through to the end of part 3. Well, sort of. He's grabbed by a dwarf and the film ends. But everyone is grabbed by a dwarf in these movies, and it never means you're killed. Because of this, he does not make the list. If his death would have been shown at the beginning of 4, if he would have been in any way mentioned, perhaps this would have been remedied. But as is, in many ways, Tim exists as a plot hole in the Phantasm universe's continuity, and because of this, his existence does not help drive the plot or help the overall grandiosity of the films. Rocky is actually very good. She can be funny, and her action scenes are great. Her problems exist in the same way as Tim's, but they are worse. She simply leaves at the end of the film. The tall man's conquering America, including her hometown, but you know what, boys? This ain't for me. Peace. If you're going to introduce her to the Phantasm universe as a hero, and you plan to not use her in later films, you need to give her a hero's salute and an honorable death. Her simply leaving is just weak and weakens the tone of the ending. Rocky fighting to the end and dying in a messy, gory Phantasm battle would have fixed everything. It wouldn't have been that hard to simply kill her off at any point during the huge final battle. At least with Tim, they planned to do something with him. Even planning to kill him off when making part 4, but according to lore, running out of money. They just pretended he didn't exist. Because of this, both Tim and Rocky's existences are marred with continuity, and in my opinion, just stupid, silly errors of planning. Neither needed to be introduced or included, and if they are, you need to own them as characters. That said, they both do a great job action-wise, and it's very nice to have a group of 4, each capable of battle, to melee with the tall man's ranks. But since their existence somewhat hurts the films as a whole, rather than helps them, they did not make the list. The soundtrack is amazing and all over the place, with guitars and reworks and seemingly existing as the only song in the film. It truly shines. But it is yet again the same song as written in the first, and since there is only room for 13 on the list, without any further ado,
It's time now, boy.
rightly taking his spot at number 1, we have Angus Scrimm as the tall man. The great Angus Scrimm is arguably at his best in 2 to 4, and in part 3 he is simply brilliant.
Welcome home, boy.
He looks horrific. His acting chops have been perfected and are simply amazing.
Your journey is now complete.
And his aging makes him fit the image of the role to an uncanny degree.
Use your brain, boy.
He is also given ever grandiose lines and dialogue, as well as much more screen time than Part 2, the main weakness of the character in that film.
You have lived in this flesh construct long enough.
The Tall Man lives on to this day as one of the most iconic and uniquely original horror creations of all time, if not the most iconic. And I doubt that would be true if they stopped with the first film. For the image people dredge up of this entity is not a middle-aged brown-haired tall man, but an aged and horrific old beast, with hair grayed by the time he seems to control.
You found your way back to where you started.
It is this image, exemplified in 2 to 4, that people recall most when the words "the tall man" are muttered. His influence is beyond argument, especially in the modern age. He directly influenced Slender Man, serving as the body of the first confirmed modern appearance. And he continues to influence and scare retro and genre fans to this day. His lines, as always, have become ever more grandiose, as has his influence and power. And unlike Pinhead from later Hellraiser films, or Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street series, or a million other cliched creatures in horror cinema, as they get more grandiose or sillier, longer and more intricate lines, and more screen time, they become less effective, campier, unbelievable, and frankly less and less scary, while sometimes being flat out stupid. This is just not so with the Tall Man.
Let me release you from this imperfect flesh that ties you to time and space.
The more grand and more ridiculous the lines he utters, the more effective he becomes. And it is here that we are given one of the best portrayals of the Tall Man in the series.
All that is unknown will be known to you once more.
To be honest, it highlights a weakness that Part 2 exhibited, simply not giving the Tall Man enough lines or enough screen time. By giving him ever more grandiose lines and more screen time, the film as a whole is truly much more creepy and simply better. Angus in many ways leads and runs this thing, and it is here that the movie truly shines when compared to the second. And thus, Angus Scrimm rightly takes his place at number 1, with no true contender capable of arguing me away from this decision. Overall, Phantasm 3 exists as much of the Phantasm films, as an over-the-top, over-grandiose attempt at an apocalyptic, dystopian-laden horror masterpiece, one that is almost always exemplified by the grand and amazing nature of the plot, executed with talent and an almost perfection, but always flawed in execution slightly, full of small aspects that push fans and laymen away, or pull the film out of the realm of pure masterpiece, introducing characters that were never meant to stay and were simply written out with no explanations in the later films, a kill that I personally find just way too ridiculous and over the top to even be funny, and some other elements that are slightly out of place. I am not completely sure how it stacks up against Part 2, being considerably better in many aspects and considerably worse in others. When I first saw it, I was actually fairly disappointed when compared to Part 2, but as I have aged, it has grown with time to represent itself solidly amongst the top Phantasm films. I have grown to appreciate its intricacies and variances when compared to the rest of the quintet, and it truly shines in many unique ways when compared to the other movies. It is not, however, my favorite, but with every viewing it becomes better. So in theory, before I die, Phantasm 3 will become my favorite by a long shot. I will believe this when I experience it. For what it is amazing, and I would argue a masterpiece of the camp horror comedic genre, but not a masterpiece beyond the genre, and I feel the common person would probably find it quite lacking. If you are a fan of older horror or of camp violence and comedy, this is a must-see. You will most likely love it. For most any horror fan, especially retro fans that have missed this film, it is definitely worth a shot. It is an amazing extension to the Phantasm universe, and arguably develops the plot more so than any other film except the original, and it is in this vein that it truly shines. It begins the brain sphere element, as well as a variety of other mysteries, paving the way for the brilliant, and as always, almost perfect masterpiece, Oblivion, which followed 4 years later. I could easily go on forever, as I personally love this film, but I fear we have reached the end of the nightmares and hilarities that Phantasm 3 has conjured, and continues to conjure in the mind of horror fans. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed any of this, please hit that like and subscribe. It is truly the only way I can grow, and I will be back with more.